to a Guardian writer, Pendle Hill is one of the most beautiful lumps of rock in the British Isles. It certainly has something, this great whaleback of sandstone grit sitting on top of thick beds of limestone, with the industrial towns of Burnley, Nelson and Colne to the east, and the market town of Clitheroe to the west. Pendle, the hill itself, largely missed out on the Industrial Revolution, as the geology, although carboniferous, didn't include any substantial coal or iron deposits, although it's said that the Romans mined lead on its lower slopes. As a result, it remained a green and open place, farmed on its lower slopes but crisscrossed with paths giving access to people of all classes on the top. And that hill is the theatre on which three key historical events played out. The first, in 1612, was the Pendle Witch Trials, more of which later. The second was the vision of George Fox, founder of the Quaker movement, who climbed up Pendle Hill and saw a people in white raiment coming to the Lord. Now, despite those early signs of religious fanaticism, Fox established a version of Christianity which was much better behaved and honestly motivated than most. Today, there are said to be about 18,000 Quakers in the UK and around 300,000 globally. Later in that same century, Richard Townley, a local gent with a fascination for science, experimented with an early barometer on Pendle Hill in 1661, taking the air pressure at different heights as part of his fascination with weather and how it functioned. On a much less grand scale, my family knew Pendle Hill first about 30 years ago, when we first moved into a small village north of Clitheroe with views of the hill, at least when the mists and rain cleared, for Pendle is often shrouded by clouds. And we discovered that Pendle isn't always green or grey, or it can be a glowing red and orange as the sunset turns it into a sort of Lancashire Uluru, or Ayers Rock as you might know it. And of course, for the people of the large industrial towns to the east, Pendle was a place of escape, somewhere to walk in the clean air away from the incessant smoke and noise of the mills and the mines. Even today, the model aircraft hobbyists and hang glider fans throw their machines and themselves off the higher slopes, and the dry ski slope looking down onto Clitheroe and its castle attracts competitive skiers from around the UK. It's almost irresistible to drive up to the nick of Pendle and simply sit and watch the clouds scud by. The sheep munch their way from tussock to tussock of tough mountain grass, and the buzzards swoop and circle. And once you've seen it from one angle, you realise this beautiful lump of rock has many, many facets, and each is different. What the men of the garrison of the Roman fort at Ribchester saw from their riverside location differs from what Robert de Lacy saw from his Norman keep, sitting on top of the rock at Clitheroe. And it's different again from what Guy Gisborne, perhaps a mythical part of the Robin Hood legend, allegedly came to see from his village of the same name on the A59 from Clitheroe to Skipton. Each view would have given you a different hill. In fact, you only catch glimpses of Pendle Hill from the towns to the east, but it is in these foothills that the true story of the Pendle Witches began a few years after James I followed Elizabeth onto the English throne. Now, we moved our family to the eastern side of the hill after a few years, and I began to become fascinated by the tale of a small group of mostly poor and certainly uneducated women who became caught up in the religious and political hysteria created in a society where the state faith requires a belief in witchcraft as the enemy, where the king himself claims to be an expert in detecting witches, and where political advancement is to be gained by finding, convicting and killing so-called witches. And you think we've got it bad today. Now, with the help of a local expert, the wonderful Maureen, owner of Witches Galore in Newchurch in Pendle, we followed the trail of those real-life witches from Pendle to Lancaster Castle's deep dungeons and on to their place of execution by hanging on the moor above that city.
Came from Ashlar House in Fence over this way towards Newchurch, from Newchurch into Burnley to Downham to Clitheroe, and from there over Waddington Fell, which is very exposed, toward the Trough of Bowland. When you think of the conditions in here, they ate in here, whatever toilet facilities there were, which would be very sparse, probably a bucket in the corner, which they'd all have to share. The smells must have been horrendous. Trying to keep themselves clean must have been very, very difficult. Yes, after all this time, it's amazing the number of people that are interested. I meet on a daily basis people from anywhere in this country, anywhere in the world, who've heard something about the Pendle Witches and they want to learn more. And there are dozens and dozens of books being written, so much literature. Local tourist industry now built on the history of the Pendle Witches.
Yeah, that's right. So they have gained, despite their terrible death, a kind of immortality.
Yes.
Of course, there aren't any witches nowadays.
Are there?
If you want to see more, the full video is now available on my YouTube channel. Because history seeps out of the rocks of this monster hill as you circle it. You can see the churchyard with the family graves of the poor dead witches. You can see the house where they were taken and investigated by an ambitious local magistrate. You can wander into the pretty postcard village of Downham with its stream running through the streets of stone cottages and the ancestral homes of the barons of Clitheroe. Not that ancestral, because they're essentially a family of Tory politicians, handed the title of Lord Clitheroe in the late Victorian era and given the baronetcy in 1955. But it looks as if it's been there forever. But this is Lancashire, and you can never go far without finding some entrepreneur has been exploiting the landscape, whether for power, minerals, or simply its climate. The high rainfall made the area ideal for milling cotton, as it's less likely to break in a damp atmosphere. And the tall chimney of Castle Cement, as I knew it, has been a constant in the view of Pendle Hill from the western side for nearly a century. It began as Ribblesdale Cement back in 1937 and became part of Castle Cement before being taken over by the world's biggest construction materials company, Heidelberg Cement, in 2007. The plant is supplied by massive local quarries, and the plume from its chimney has been the subject of complaints for decades. With a £6.5 million improvement, the latest of those improvements due to be completed this year. It can be quite pretty though for pollution. And Pendle Hill quite enjoys, I think, having that plume of smoke constantly rising to one side. And of course Pendle itself dwarfs anything around it, even that chimney. And it's easy to understand why it has its own social media groups and fan pages. And the witch's tale is what dominates any discussion of Pendle these days. Barometers and other historic events have been overshadowed. Now that's small compensation for those victims of 17th century religious bigotry, but they are still alive to many people 4 centuries later. But that's history for you.